Hey guys, it's Josh with Budget Mechanic. Today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the air conditioning compressor on this 2005 Toyota Sienna. It's got the 3.3 V6 in it. And obviously before you do any work on an air conditioner, you need to get the system evacuated because it's under a lot of pressure. If you don't have the tools to do that, you can take it to most auto mechanic shops and just let them know you only want it evacuated, and then you'll come back after the job is done for them to refill it. But let's get started. Okay, to get this compressor out, because it's down here underneath the alternator, we're going to have to get the alternator out of the way first, and that'll give us access to the compressor to remove it. So first things first, because we are going to be dealing with the power to the alternator, I'm going to remove the negative terminal on the battery. I'm just going to loosen this AC line fitting just to give myself a little bit of flexibility. Once I remove this tab, then I can kind of move this around a little more. Next, I'm going to work on the wires to the alternator. So under this boot here, got a 10mm nut. Pull that out, and then we can just unhook this lead. The next one is this control wire clip right here on the right hand side. You push that in, plug comes right out. So this tab right there you push on the back. Now I'm going to crack this pivot bolt loose on the alternator. It's a 14mm. They can be pretty tight, so I use my larger ratchet. Okay, next I'm going to break loose this tensioner lock bolt. Here's the tensioner right here, but I got to loosen the locker first. 12mm. Now I can actually start releasing the tension on the alternator belt by loosening this guy. You should start to see the alternator pivoting down and the belt loosening up. Okay, now that the belt's off, I can actually go back and remove this tensioner locking bolt that I just loosened before. Okay, so I'm just gonna pull the bolt out, and this block down here is going to stay in the same place. Just keep an eye on the orientation. You can kind of see this hole is on one side of the block, and on mine the hole is on the bottom side versus this way. Now that that bolt is out, we can come back to the main pivot bolt. This one can be pretty sticky. You might have to thread it all the way out. There we go. Pull it out. Okay, sometimes you can just wiggle these free. This one looks like it's pretty loose. If you have a sticky one, it's good to take a pry bar and you get it in between the alternator and this mount, and you just lever it out. There we go. Okay, now that the alternator's out, we have great access to the compressor below. The alternator bracket will need to be removed. There's some wire harness and zip ties, the high and low pressure lines, and then we'll be ready to take it out. There's 3 bolts for this alternator bracket. The first one is down underneath this tensioner, 12mm. So the next bolt is up if you follow the bracket up where it connects to the engine. There's a 14mm bolt right here. It's actually a nut. Okay, so directly below this 14mm nut we just took off, there's a 10mm bolt holding this metal wiring plate on. There, and that just pulls this off. Okay, back to the 14mm, there's another nut right below on this bracket. This bracket slides right off. So next we're going to unplug this wire, little tab on the front side. Now the zip tie clip that's holding it into this bracket, on the right hand side there's these little wings. On this side you want to push these wings down while you're pulling it, and it'll work itself right out. So before you get too far, you want to make sure there's no pressure in the system. So put on your safety glasses, go to the low pressure side, cap with the L or the smaller port, And inside is a valve with a little pin on top. And you should have had your system evacuated already, so there shouldn't be any pressure, but you just want to double check to make sure that nothing's going to surprise you when you start taking the lines off the compressor. So what you're going to do is just stick a screwdriver down inside and just push down on that little pin. There's a little tiny bit in mine, so there's nothing there. If tons of green Freon starts spraying out at you, high pressure, stop, and you need to go and get that thing evacuated properly. But you just want to confirm that there's no pressure on it. So we're going to now loosen all 4 of the mounting bolts on the compressor. So we have 2 easily accessible up here, and then directly below both of them we have our 3rd and 4th. So we're not going to take them all the way out, we're just going to break them loose. 12 millimeter. Okay, so number 3, I'm going to lose the extension. Oh. Number 4, you follow this bracket down. Oh man. Now that I have all 4 mounting bolts loosened, I'm actually going to remove the high and low pressure lines from the back of the compressor. It's a 10 millimeter retaining nut on top. Okay, now I can just wiggle the line loose. Obviously, if you haven't evacuated your system yet, this is going to be very exciting at this point. So make sure there's no pressure in there. Okay, I'm just going to plug these lines. I've got some silicone plugs that I'm going to use. If you don't have any of those, you could just, wrap it up with saran wrap or some sort of a tape. But I just want to make sure that no debris or dust, oil, or anything gets in those while I'm working on the rest of it. Okay, I'm going to take these mounting bolts out completely, starting with the bottom. So just make sure that when you pull this compressor out, you're not going to yank any wires, kind of work things around so it has a straight shot up through. Okay, so I'm going to pull this bolt out with the bracket. And here we go. Before I put the new one in, just going to compare it to my old part, make sure everything's in the same place, which it looks like it is. I've got the wire in the right place. Obviously my bolts are. Wire here, same place. There is a bit of a difference in that this pulley has a shield on it and this one doesn't, but it's not going to interfere with the functionality of it, so that's going to work fine. The compressor that I bought came with the compressor oil already installed. So oftentimes compressors will come that way. If they don't, or if it doesn't say that they do, this would be the point where you would add your own compressor oil. And it would just be as simple as finding out which kind that your compressor takes, or your system takes, and you would add it into these high or low ports before you install the compressor. All right, when you're reinstalling, just keep note that there are 2 different sizes for the 4 mounting bolts. The longer ones go on the bottom, and the 2 shorter ones go up top. I'm just going to put the bracket piece on, keep the alternator mounting bolt up top. I'm going to put this bolt through so that I have something to hang this on once I get it in there. Line up that bolt and get it started. Just make sure you go through the bracket hole at the bottom. Now tighten the upper too. Okay, now that I have them all snugged, I can take my 3/8 drive and really tighten them up. These are really long bolts, so you don't want to over tighten them. All right, your new compressor should have come with new O-rings. If it didn't, you want to make sure you purchase some new ones for the high and low pressure lines. Those need to be replaced. So if you have a pick, it makes it really easy to get the old one off. And you want to kind of make sure it's all clean of debris. Get it over my little plug. And just work it around. So now that my lines are completely prepared to go on the compressor with new O-rings, I will then remove the plugs that came installed on the new one. I'm just going to do one at a time just to reduce any chance of stuff going down inside there. I'm going to remove my little silicone plug. So this is the line coming from the low pressure side down here, and then this is your high. Give them a little wiggle as you snug the nut down. So once you have them fully seated, then you can tighten them up with a wrench. There we go. Okay, next step in going back up is going to be this bracket. And these outer holes slip over the studs coming out of the engine. And then the third point on that bracket, this 12mm bolt, under here, underneath this alternator tensioner. I'm going to cinch that bolt up now. And also tightening up the two 14mm nuts. So then I've got the bracket that's going to be held in by that 10mm bolt between the two nuts that we just put on. Kind of have to do everything blind. This one. Got that. So I have this clip on the wire here that's going to go back in its hole on the bracket. And then also this little plug. Next to go back in is the alternator. And as you go in, just keep in mind that these plugs need to be facing up when it's all said and done. First thing I'm going to aim for is to get this lined up with the engine so I can slide that big bolt through. Okay, one important note, you want to make sure before that this alternator goes into place that this wiring harness gets shoved inside of this black bracket so it doesn't interfere with the belt later on. And there's actually a little clip on the harness that clips into a slot on the timing belt cover. So once that's in there, then you can lower your alternator into place. Just got to find that hole. There it is. For this second bolt going into the alternator, you want to make sure that the block on the tensioner is oriented with the hole down. And then you've just got to go through the block with your bolt and try to find the threads on the alternator. This is always a bit of a adventure. Usually you got to lift the alternator up, swing it up on that upper bolt until you find it. There, I got it. So you want to just finger tighten it, but not too tight that it hinders it from pivoting. Next step, you're going to put your belt back in. You can save a little money by reusing your belt if it's in good shape, because it's not a hard one to get to. You can check that by rolling it over to the ribs, and if you pinch it and there's cracks running along the crossways, it's time for a new belt. But this one looks like it's in great shape, so I'm going to reuse it. It's going to go around your crankshaft pulley, right down there, over to your new AC compressor, right here, and then last step will be up to the alternator, just in a big triangle. So I'm going to start with the hardest one first, that crank pulley all the way back there. So I'm going to use this screwdriver just to loop it over the pulley in the back. Over the alternator. Cool. Just make sure it's seated properly. Okay, so now I'm going to put tension on this belt. And if I lift up on the alternator with one hand, I can just finger tighten this tensioner. So you want to tighten that tensioner up on the alternator to the point where when you reach down with a screwdriver, kind of in the mid-span area, that it deflects maybe down 3/4 of an inch, half an inch or so. You don't want it to be rock hard. That would be too tight. And then if you start up the car or you turn on your air conditioning and the belt starts squealing, you know you got to tighten it up a little bit. So when your tension is set, you're going to come in here and lock the tensioner with this sideways facing bolt, 12mm. And that just holds the sliding part so it doesn't ever loosen. I'm just going to snug that up. And now you're also going to tighten up that main pivot bolt, the 14mm So time to plug in the alternator with the electrical plug here. And then we have our positive lead over the post. Make sure it's all the way seated down and the little teeth are in their holes. And I'm just going to get that boot nice and snug down on top of the plug. I'm going to reattach this little bracket on the AC line. And last of all, reconnect the battery. All right, now that the new compressor is in, you just need to get the AC system refilled and you're good to go. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching, and please help us continue making videos by subscribing, and we'll see you next time.